Making Super Pursuit Boat car. And how that came about.
Well, I worked for George for about 12, 14 years, right in around there. I'm not exactly how many years it was, but it was some of the most fun years of all my life. But I worked the shop out the back. I did all this sheet metal fabrication for all of the cars that took place in George's shop for that amount of years. But I'd gotten a little tired of it, and I got out of it, and I got into a completely different industry. I got into the fishing business of all things. But one day George called me up and says, "Hey, I've got a little project over here I want to look at." And I just said, "George, I'm not interested at all." And he kept calling me for a couple, 3 weeks, and finally we sat down and talked, and I said, "What do you have?" And he pulled out 3 or 4 photographs of these renderings, and he said that the Universal wanted to do this pursuit car for Knight Rider. And I said, well, I still really wasn't interested, but we talked and we talked and we talked. Anyway, we got around to it, and I said, okay, I'll do it. So there was 4 vehicles we had to do, and I said, well, where are all the plans? What do we start with? And he said, well, there are no plans. He said, this is it. And I said, well, how long do we have? And I thought we'd have about 4 or 5 months to put it all together. He said, we've got 8 weeks to do the whole job. So I said, okay. So normally when you start a project like this, you would start with a blank sheet of paper and you get all the numbers and everything put together. Well, we didn't even have a sheet of paper. We had a blank piece of concrete out in the warehouse, out in the garage. So I started off with a piece of string and a chalk line, and we started to design everything from the ground up. And the very first vehicle that I built was the one that was a tow vehicle that showed all of the close-ups with Michael actually driving the car, and then if you remember that the hardtop folded up, and this is before that all the hardtops, the breakdown fold-ups like the Mercedes and stuff have today. We had to design this so that the hardtop came back and folded up in one piece and went back down in the trunk, and that was a real engineering feat in itself. But in the meantime, we had to do another vehicle that George said that we have to have all of these aerodynamics with all of the wings and all of the stuff that actuate, and the car actually drove. So that was the next thing that I attacked, and we got that all done. But a lot of those were kind of, in the actual street version, a lot of those features were actually fixed. They were solid on the car. But we had to actually make these work, and this was before we had any of the special effects type stuff that you could do with computers and everything. This actually had to work. So to get the front bumper to move forward and actually separate as a battering ram, and the wings to actuate at the very front coming out of the fenders, this took a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of 24/7s, let me tell you. And the very first thing I did there was take a pickup truck from out the back to the local hydraulics shop, and bought about a ton of lines and hydraulic rams to bring back to the shop. And we proceeded to put all of these things together so at the flip of a switch or the touch of a button, all of these wings actually worked, and the hydraulic brakes, the back fenders actually flipped out at 90 degrees, the wings popped up, the rockets off the back actually worked. Everything was functional on the vehicle. So that's the real story and how everything came about on the Pursuit vehicle. And it was a lot of fun, and it was great fun working with my good friend again, George.
I got to say one thing about Dennis. The biggest problem I had with him was he's from Australia. To get him to speak English was very tough for me, so I could understand what he was talking about. But as you can see, he finally learned how to speak a little bit of English.
It might have been a rough landing, or when you're doing a ski mode type photo shoot, or having a drive-by that the car fell, or something bad happened. Is there like one time in your mind that, oh my God, I remember this?
I mean, from my standpoint, the car came apart every time I hit the ground. You got to figure out, I'm dropping out of the air 30 feet. So I mean, it was one piece, but, you know, the front end was bent up, 3 feet, and I was kind of half semi-unconscious inside of it, trying to get my bearings. I mean, they were all really hard landings, but I still wanted to do it every week because we were always breaking new ground. The best part about the car was that the character, you could say, let's jump over 2 buildings, or jump between 2 buildings, or I jumped across Main Street, or there's all kind of things you can think up that in a normal series, you have to try and find a way to make it relevant. In Knight Rider, since the car could do anything, you could actually come up with anything you wanted. The only thing I gotta say though is when we did go into Super Pursuit mode, I all of a sudden got like 19,000 switches inside this thing that I had to push on and push off, and I'm saying which one is this and which one is that, and people are screaming at me on the radio, and things are popping out on the hood and popping up in the back, so it made things a little more difficult, but it did make the series a lot more interesting because it gave it a different look. So I'll turn it over to Buzz and see if he has some ski stories.
Well, I have a few ski stories, but I can tell you about one jump that I did. Jack did most of the jumps, but unfortunately I've done a few. But anyways, in this one jump, I was jumping a kid card, and it was a ramp to ground jump, and oh well, I'm a little older than Jack. So when I did land on the ground, it was very hard, and they had to take me out on the board, and unfortunately I broke my back. But other than that, no problems, and so I'll just stick to skiing a car, and right now I'm retired, so I don't have to worry about any of the stunts anymore.
I gotta bring up one thing about Jack. I don't know if you remember the one scene where Kit hit the air and it's flying, and there's a Camaro underneath him. And I said to Jack, his brother Andy was driving the Camaro, and he drove underneath, and Kit's up in the air coming down. And I said, Jack, how's Andy gonna know when you're gonna come down and hit him? He said, don't worry, George. Andy puts the mirrors up like that, and he looks at his mirror, and his suspension system gets a little close, then Andy will go off to the right, Jack will come down, hit the ground, and then all the explosion goes. I remember that when you did that? That was dynamite.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these jumps, I kind of always put my little brother in because I figured I wanted to be on top. I'm not going to be in the bottom car. And we did a lot of them. We jumped, head on at each other. We jumped the same direction. And when you're jumping the same direction, you have to go almost twice the speed of the car that you're jumping because you lose so much speed on the ramp. And I remember being down in West Covina, California, jumping across Main Street with cars in the intersection, and we were jumping between buildings, and I only had about 2 feet of clearance on either side of the mirror on the far side. So if you're off your ramp by maybe 6 inches on the opening side, you're gonna be off 3 or 4 feet on the other side, and I'm gonna hit the building in the air. Well, I was worried about that. I was worried about a lot of other things. I'm trying to line this thing up, and all of a sudden this technical guy from Caltech came out and said, there's absolutely no way with this ramp and these dimensions that you can clear Main Street without killing all these people that are on the street. And I said, we've been doing this show for 3 years already, and I've done this jump the same distance 1,000,000 times. And he said, we're shutting you down. There's no way you can do this jump. And so we pleaded with the police at the time, and the police said, look, if he says he can do it, he can do it. You can stand here, we're gonna get all the people out of the way. If he lands on the cars, then that's his problem. Well, I got back, did this jump, jumped across Main Street, landed on the other side. The whole steering column broke on the other side, and I bashed into the side of the wall. But I got out with a finished jump that worked and walked back over and couldn't even find the Caltech guy. He had gotten in his car and gone home. So a lot of things that we did on Knight Rider kind of baffled people as to how we could do it, because it was a very small ramp. The total height of the ramp is only 32 inches high. So, it's 14 feet long and 32 inches high, and you get 30 feet high in the air and you go 120 feet, and that's baffling to the Caltech guys, but it's just the way the car works. So we had a lot of fun with the car. It was a great treat on my end to be able to work on it for this long, and also to be able to walk away and say that I worked on a show that really brought cheer to everybody, and I'm glad you all enjoyed it.
Let's thank Jack, and Jack brought his wife Morgan here today. And one other thing is Jackie and Buzz have been married for 47 years.